Greetings and welcome to the Convocation Unscripted, and this is our monthly live episode. I'm one of your hosts, Jemar Tisby. I forgot my name for a second, and joined as always by Kristin Du Mez
Hey, it's so good to be here and so good to have all you joining us.
and Robbie Jones,
Hi, everybody. Hi, Jamar. Hi, Kristen.
and of course our in absentia Where's Waldo co-host is Diana Butler Bass. We're thinking of you as always. We're scholars. Three historians and a sociologist. We explore how religion shapes America's past and present, but the kicker is we're always responding in real time, partly because the news is happening so fast and furious, we cannot plan for it. And so there's no prep, no scripts, just raw, unfiltered conversation. So that's why we call it the Convocation Unscripted. And this episode, this special live episode, is officially in session. Hey, y'all.
Whew, it's been a week once again.
Yeah, and that was just today.
What a year this week has been. Um, as always, I gotta say, I travel a bunch, but this time I'm really excited. I am tuning in as we chime in the chat. Thank you. Y'all know what to do. You're already telling us where you're tuning in from. Also, the questions. We promise you most of this episode is going to be Q&A, and you always have the best questions. So please do use that Q&A function. For most of you, it's going to be on the bottom of your screen. It's going to literally say it's going to say Q&A, but there's going to be a question mark box. That's where you put your questions. Don't put your questions in the chat. We'll lose track of them, and we would love to get to them. So start dropping them even right now. You don't have to wait for us to finish talking. So I am tuning in from Belfast, Northern Ireland. I'm partly talking fast because I'm on maybe my third cup of coffee to try to get through this jet lag. But it is the Four Corners Festival, and Four Corners is different parts of the city which are divided Catholic and Protestant. And so it's a reconciliation kind of event. I came here 2 years ago with the Telos group studying peacemaking, and thankfully made some connections, and they invited me back to speak at the conference. So I'll be speaking there Sunday, but we just did a half day of filming about Frederick Douglass's time in Belfast. And in
Wow.
2023, they dedicated a statue to Douglass in the city. And
Mm.
so we got a tour from an expert in abolition and all this stuff. So I cannot wait to show you this video project. And it shouldn't take but a few weeks, but that's where I am. How are y'all doing? Where are you all up? What are you up to?
Well, I just got back from being across the pond myself. So I was in the UK last week and was there for a conference, actually, a transatlantic conference at Cambridge on, yeah, this kind of internationalization of Christian nationalism that's showing up in all kinds of ways across Europe. It was funny. I was doing a follow-up Zoom today actually with someone who was there, and if you can see this thing hanging on the wall this side, this is actually an indigenous rug, but the person from the UK saw this white background with the red crosses in it. He's like, "Why do you have the St. George's flag flying behind you?" And the reason why he was saying that is because it has been adopted by the Reform UK movement in England as a kind of Christian nationalist symbol and flag there. So it's functioning kind of like the Confederate flag functions in the U.S. So if you see that flag flying in the UK, it is kind of part of this kind of internationalized Christian nationalist movement. Anyway, so I've been there, sort of having many of these same conversations with colleagues, including scholars from Hungary, one of whom was fired from his university position for taking for calling out the ways that Christian nationalism has been taking over and undermining democracy in Hungary. So it's a very live and real conversation, not just here, but really, really around the world, certainly, and gaining traction even across Europe. So that's where I've been. I'm now, I think, fully back on my right time zone, and so not. I talk fast anyway, so I don't need coffee to get me to talk fast. So I don't know. Kristen, where are you?
Oh, my life pales in comparison to yours. I have barely left this office, this little office for weeks. I am in the final stages
Mm.
of my next book. And so I am happy to report, as of last night, I have received the final edits, back from my editor. Very light corrections here and there. I should be able to finish them in a couple of days and prepare the manuscript for submission. And I knew it was a good sign when that email was signed off with congratulations. And
That's
so,
amazing.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's what you
Huge.
want to hear. And so I can say that I can absolutely see the light at the end of that tunnel, and it's been a long, dark tunnel. So
Yeah.
the sense of relief is actually distracting. I don't
Mm.
actually quite know what to do with myself. I'm having a hard time focusing just to finish it up because I have lived under that stress for so long. And
Right.
so that's the news from my front.
Tell us,
It gives
tell
the
us the,
title. That's
yes,
right.
and the
Oh, okay. The
subtitle.
title. The title is Live, Laugh, Love: The Secret History of White Christian Women and the World They Made.
Good
And we will have
Lord.
a cover reveal soonish. And yeah, it's starting to feel real.
Yeah. And for those of you who haven't been tracking, my book and Kristen's book are going to be out within a couple of weeks of each other in September.
Yep.
And
Yep.
in fact, I haven't done the official cover reveal, but for anybody who wants to zoom in,
Oh, no
right
way.
there is the cover
No
of
way.
the new cover of the book. I
Wow.
can't do more than that right now because I haven't done the full cover
It's
reveal,
great.
but it's
Take a
kind of back
screenshot
there.
and zoom in.
Yeah, it's back
Yeah.
there, kind of hiding, and it's called Backslide: Reclaiming a Faith and a Nation After the Christian Turn Against Democracy.
Good Lord.
We will we'll keep you both all posted, and we're scheming, see what we can do together as well,
Yeah. Yeah.
and hopefully bring it to somewhere near you as we kind of hit the road in the fall.
I
So,
gotta get some of your brain power. It's not as climactic, but I did officially turn in the second round of book revisions for my upcoming book, which is gonna be January 27. So we're
That
about a
is
year
big.
out.
Yeah.
Um, it's been an interesting process, and since we're on the live, and this is like a special whatever for our listeners, this is the first book where my other books has been very sort of straightforward. We all knew what it was about, but this one, it's been an iterative process. What this thing is gonna be has evolved with each revision, and I'm a little bit nervous about that. There's another round of revision, so it's not, we have time, but it's been a different process. Every book is like a different child. I don't know, like whatever you did on the one before, it's not immediately transferable to the next one. So a little behind the scenes from some authors here, but we've got
yeah,
some news to cover. I don't know if it was because I was traveling or what, but I kind of totally missed this prayer breakfast thing. But essentially, it sounds to me like it was a white Christian nationalist Lollapalooza. So I would love to hear what happened, what went down, and your thoughts on it.
Oh, well, I'll start because I think Robbie, you probably have more specifics. And by the way, there's a whole section, the National Prayer Breakfast in Live, Laugh, Love, and some of the roots of it. And I think it'll be interesting to many of you to see where that's actually coming from and what's going on there. But I obviously have been editing, so I did not have time to tune in, but I really want to watch the whole thing. And so over lunch, I watched about 25 minutes of Trump's speech, which went for an hour and 20 minutes, right? And then there's
three
others.
times as long as he was supposed to talk. That's
Oh,
for his slot. Yep.
I mean, right. So there's a lot of material there. And let me just tell you one general response that I had, but I felt it deeply. And it is, if we make it through this moment, if there's another side, right? If there's any kind of reckoning, what I want, so here, I'll admit, sometimes we're trying to find hope, sometimes where it's resilience, and sometimes there's anger, right? Maybe even some bitterness. What I want is for every person who voted for this man, every Christian who supported him, every Christian who did not vocally oppose him, I want them to sit down and watch this speech
Mm,
from start to finish and own it.
mm.
That's what I felt watching it. So I'll turn it over to you, Robbie. You
No,
can fill in on some of the specifics, but that's what I felt watching it.
I think that's right. I was feeling you articulated it, I think, much more clearly, but I identify with that so much because I was thinking, yeah, I mean, so he cursed through the whole thing. He was just
Mm.
crass, flippant. Just a couple of like weird highlights of, I mean, essentially, said at one point that he was kind of unfamiliar with the practice of even saying grace before meals,
Wow.
and that he was surprised when Speaker Johnson wanted to say a prayer before a meal together, like as if that was an unfamiliar practice for him. And he even said, like Robert Jeffries, who was again First Baptist Dallas, the one of the early people to support Trump. He kind of went back and rehearsed all of this way back when. He was just all over the map. But even just saying, he's quoting, he's sort of fake quoting Jeffries here. He's kind of saying what he thought Jeffries said. He said, "Oh, Trump may not have even ever read the Bible." Uh, but he'll be a much stronger messenger for us than anybody else. And Trump's not disputing the fact that he's never read the Bible. He's not disputing that he was like not even familiar with the very practice of like saying prayer, saying a prayer before a meal. So just outwardly flaunting, right? The fact that he just like is so flippant and doesn't really care about, any of these kind of Christian practices or our beliefs or scripture or any of the things that evangelicals supposedly hold dear. And yet, exactly what you're saying. So, what about this man like would be appealing to him other than just like this very, meeting Trump on his own terms, which is a very quid pro quo, instrumentalist, utilitarian. We'll just support you because you're going to give us what we want, and we'll in return give you what you want. And that's about the height of the morality. I studied political ethics in my PhD program, and man, I mean, you can't even put that on a map anywhere, right? I mean,
No,
it's just
no.
pure, power exchange. I
Yeah.
mean, there's not even a pretense of anything you might call a political ethic left anymore.
And it's a bit of
Religion
a,
is hot right now. Religion is hot, and it's all thanks to Trump. So that's as
Yeah.
far
Well,
as
I was glad that he reminded us that he brought back from the brink of extinction the word Christmas
oh
at one
oh
point, of course.
boy, we were
So,
right on a razor's edge there.
yeah, right,
We could have
right.
lost that in
Yeah,
2026. It's a
yeah,
bit of a self-own because as a Christian, you don't need to claim the candidate you favor represents your religious beliefs. Like you don't have to do that. You could
yeah.
just say, we like his policies, or we don't like the way he talks, but we likes what he gets done, which some have said. But to claim that he represents Christianity is pointless and only makes you look foolish in the biblical sense between wisdom and foolishness, right? Where someone who clearly doesn't exhibit the fruit of the Spirit, someone who clearly isn't maturing in the faith, because early on, 10 years ago, it was, oh, he's a baby Christian, he's just learning.
Right, right.
Well, after 10 years, you would expect some growth.
he's
Um,
a big baby Christian
he's a
now.
very big baby now.
Maybe even a
And
regressing baby Christian, right?
right. And to cling to this fantasy, this fever dream that he's somehow a Christian is obviously false on its face from it, at least the fruit, but you don't even have to do it. It's politically pointless at this point. It just so I don't know why. And I think that's really a powerful indictment, Kristen. Like you should have to sit down and
Mhm.
sit through this
Yeah.
and say what of this beliefs, what of your beliefs this represents.
Yeah.
And take responsibility. Take responsibility for what you have done to our country.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still going back to like, the only thing I felt I could even muster the energy to write in the aftermath of the last presidential election was one piece I wrote for Time
That's right.
magazine, and I just titled it "What White Christians Have Wrought," like that old word, WROUGHT, wrought. And that's about all I felt like I had to say. Because all the other pundits were picking apart, oh, like this group moved this many points and this group moved that many points. And it was all about like the groups that moved toward Trump. And, that's interesting in its own way. It's just kind of straight up analysis. But at the end of the day, the reason he was sitting in the White House is because white Christians put him there. Like, and period. The rest of that was around the edges of things. And just remembering that that's who's responsible, are white Christians in the country, and not just evangelicals. Let me remind everybody, 85% of white evangelicals, but also 6 in 10 white non-evangelical mainline Protestants and 6 in 10 white Catholics pulled the lever for Trump every time he's been on the ballot.
So speaking of elections, we
Hmm.
should probably talk about the midterms because we've heard a couple of things in this past week about what to expect for the midterms. Let's see, Robbie, you want to fill us in on that?
Well, I've been saying that I'm not even thinking about the sort of presidentials, down the road, because I really think that this is the hinge point. And so what we've heard are, even before this last week, we already heard Trump. He always does these trial balloon things. And we already heard him say in one speech to an evangelical audience, my beautiful Christians, if you vote for me this time, you won't have to vote again. We'll fix it so you won't have to vote again. And everybody kind of blew that off and went, it's him just kind of riffing. But now he's actually saying, right, things like, Republicans should take over and nationalize the elections. He seized ballot boxes from Fulton County, Georgia, all to kind of, try to go back to this myth, which he went back to in the prayer breakfast today, saying the election was stolen from him. So he lied even at the prayer breakfast today. And trying to kind of get the FBI to somehow provide some shred of evidence for that lie is all with this 20, back to the 2020 election. Anyway, but the chilling thing is him saying that they're going to federalize the election and that they're going to oversee it. He's even talking about, and Steve Bannon is talking about sending ICE agents in ahead of time to kind of patrol only certain districts. And even he's so transparent about it. He even said, yeah, we might only have to do this in 15 or so districts. And it just so happens that, that's about the number of districts that it would take to flip the balance of power in Congress, because there's so many races that aren't competitive because of gerrymandering. There's really only a couple dozen races that are close and that would shift the balance of power. So you don't have to interfere everywhere. You really do only have to interfere, and maybe a dozen or a little bit more than that. And he's just saying that out loud now. That this is actually the intent, right, to kind of intimidate people with ICE or maybe the National Guard, and then also just to federalize and kind of take it over from the states. And by the way, our Constitution very clear, right, that elections belong to the states, and the founders were so clear that the person who should remain the furthest from those elections would be the executive branch of the United States.
So what Trump said, this was on the Dan Bongino podcaster show,
Yeah,
is the Republicans should say we want to take over. We should take over the voting in at least as many 15 places. The Republicans ought to nationalize voting. This, as you said, Robbie, comes on the heel of the FBI, along with Tulsi Gabbard, Director of National Intelligence, overlooking taking 700 boxes of voting records from the election center in Fulton County, Georgia, which is majority black area, and again, relitigating the 2020 election, which has literally been litigated in courts and no nefarious wrongdoing or
yeah,
stolen election has been found. But it's really not just about the past, it's also about the future and sort of seeding doubt about the
yeah.
integrity of elections. And so, as someone said in the comments, Congress can't nationalize the midterms just like that. But what they can do is sufficiently undermine confidence in very uncritical people and intimidate people through the use of force or other threats. And so the threat to me, and y'all may have a different view, isn't that elections will be canceled, isn't even that they'll be nationalized, at least right now. The threat to me is they'll be effective at controlling messaging as well as, in some senses, the process. I don't know how they would do that, but also intimidating people, particularly people of color, from going to the polls. And listen, this is what I think we all have to understand. Whatever the strategy is, they are fighting for their lives. Any thinking person in that regime knows that if they lose the midterms, accountability is coming in
Yeah.
some way, shape, or form, and probably not even to the extent that it should
No,
come.
no.
But they won't be able to run as freely as they are now, and there will be some consequences. And so they are pulling out all the stops. And what I would say is, I don't know, it feels like 2026 of all the years of this first and second term is going to be a knockdown, drag out
Yeah.
that will determine the next several years, if not decades, in our political system. And lastly, I am incredibly frustrated that church leaders don't seem to understand this. They are still too concerned about seeming political, about seeming to take a side, about being too involved in worldly affairs. I don't know what it is. But if I'm a faith leader looking at the literal collapse of democracy in real time, I would want there to be some record of my preaching and my teaching and the way we've structured our discipleship that speaks to this moment. And so I cannot say forcefully enough. Grow a spine, sit up, pay attention, and literally do your job as a shepherd.
Amen. Oh, and one more thing that we should worry about for the midterms is the SAVE Act, right?
All right.
Purportedly about voter ID. So the SAVE Act, I had to, it stands for Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act. But what this does is would stipulate that a driver's license alone would not be sufficient identification to vote because it doesn't say nationality or where you were born necessarily, not in all states. And so, what you would need is a birth certificate that matches your current name, your ID. Now, who is that going to disenfranchise?
Women.
Married women.
Mm.
I won't be eligible to vote, right? This is what is happening, and this is what I mean. If you in the 20-25 minutes of the speech that I heard Trump give today, he referenced this national prayer breakfast, right? About, well, this is just voter ID. 98% of Americans support this. It's the Democrats who want corruption and fraud, right? Just oh my goodness, pay attention here. Right? This is what they are talking about. And yeah, they don't have to do it everywhere. They don't have to enforce it everywhere. They just need to enforce it in a few locations. That's it. Or, right, contest the votes based on, right, this propaganda that they're spewing at this point, if and when the election doesn't go their way.
Yeah, and I should just point out, like, anytime you hear Trump say 98% of Americans support something, I mean, your BS meter should just go off. Like he's
100% wrong.
he's just
Take
like
it from
make
the social
no, I mean to
scientists.
speak Trump's language, he's 200% wrong. Um, which of course is impossible. It really almost none of it comes from any factual. He just like literally makes numbers up. Right. So it's quite stunning. You kind of go try to find it. There is no such poll anywhere that shows those sort of numbers. And so that's crazy. The other thing to say is that like only half of Americans have a passport, which would be the other thing you might reach for there. And then, yeah, to think about if any of you had to go back and try to find birth certificates or marriage certificates, I mean, it's a whole thing, right? That can take
Yes.
weeks.
Hmm.
So that's
Hmm.
obviously, if you don't think about it a month ahead of time, at least,
At least.
then you can't vote in that
And a
election.
lot of primaries are coming up next month. The midterms start now
Yeah.
in a lot
And,
of ways.
and it's just worth saying that, there's a whole theology behind this, right? There should be, that even JD Vance has kind of expressed some support for it. It should just be household voting, right? And who should vote? Well, the head of the
Mhm.
household, the man,
Mhm.
should cast the vote for the household. Like that kind of idea is literally percolating around, kind of Christian nationalist circles,
Oh,
right?
yes.
This idea of heads of household and men should vote for the whole family. So that's what's kind of behind some of this stuff.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, that's the like theology or ideology behind it, but there's a practical reason for it that trumps any ideology, right? And that is they know that women tend to vote more
Yeah.
Democrat. So if they could just purge that, and this is stuff you'll hear said this blatantly in Christian nationalist circles, right? They'll actually talk about the practical effects more than they will the kind of theological justification, which
Mm,
is women vote Democrat. That alone is justification for disenfranchising women, right? It's all about power, what they need to do to seize and hold power. And this is a key step. They're looking at the same survey data that Robbie looks at, and they're like, wow, think about what we could do if we just got rid of female voters, right? We have a lock on this. Um,
mm.
so
Yeah.
so that's really, and I have to say, I have a sentence on this in Jesus and John Wayne. So, I was researching that book almost a decade ago now. When I first came across that, I thought, you've got to be kidding me, right? I wasn't going to include it. And then I just kept bumping into that argument that women should not have a right to vote in the primary sources. And then it was actually a source that I came across that convinced me to put it in the book. And that was somebody inside conservative spaces saying, hey guys, we need to confront this. He was against that, as a conservative white Christian man, saying this is percolating, in our spaces. It's becoming more common. We need to address this head on, right? That's when I thought, okay, if he's saying he's hearing it and he's talking to insiders to say, let's deal with it, then I can justify putting it in my book. It's not that far of an outlier that I'm not just, trying to make them look bad. I'm just saying, hey, this is bubbling up. Now we are, 7, 8 years after I put that in the book. And yeah, it's commonplace in those circles. And yeah, if women have to submit to their husbands, and they should be voting in a way that supports their husband's choices 100%. You can see, well, why even have it? And also worth noting, right, that this household vote has roots in the American South. And the white master, the patriarch, right, is the master of the whole household. And that includes women, and that includes children, and that included enslaved people as well. Part of the household. He has the authority over that household. This is the model of society that they would like to return to.
100%. And I will say, chillingly, the first time I got exposed to that kind of thinking was in seminary among my classmates and in the Presbyterian Church in America, PCA. It's the first time I heard of something called kinism around pure blood of the white race. It's the first time I heard of neo-Confederates, a movement to bring back the ideas of the Confederacy, including essentially a plantation structured society. And the first time I heard about household voting, where women didn't need the right to vote. The man, as the head of the household and the head of the woman in the Bible, is perfectly capable and is in fact ordained by God to cast the vote for the household.
Yes.
And so it's just very chilling that it was in these Christian circles that
Mhm.
I first got exposed to any of this. And I have to say, folks, we're only at 15 questions. We need double that in the next 2 minutes. So go ahead and drop your questions. I see a couple questions in here that are directed at specific people. So if hearts and minds are clear, you don't have anything else you want to add to this topic of the midterms, we can transition into Q&A.
Well, let me grab a question. If I'm seeing here Charles Meadows, because it relates to exactly what we're talking about right now. So maybe that can transition us into the Q&A. And it is, do you think conservative white women will balk at SAVE? Today, I've seen a few very Trumpy old church friends post about repeal the 19th, and they are appalled. So that's good. It came out because a guy who stormed the Capitol is running for U.S. Senate in West Virginia right now. So I'm very glad to hear that some of these conservative Trumpy church ladies are appalled at that. That is, um, all good, all good. And honestly, a little bit surprising. Um, Not that women would be upset with this, but that they would voice that concern and then, try to cause some friction, right? So that would be my worry. I would be, frankly, quite surprised if conservative women kind of mobilize in opposition to this. I just don't see them playing that role, but I would absolutely love to be proven wrong.
I mean, I could just say that we have not in the past seen, we do see in the general population a gender gap, as Kristen was referring, but when you get inside conservative white Christian circles, that gender
Single
gap
digit.
just, I mean, it's there a little bit, but it
Yeah.
really does almost disappear.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one thing the Hillary Clinton campaign found out very quickly, that was thinking they were going to rely on a lot of conservative white Christian women voting, and it did not turn out to be true, right? So and I think it's kind of remarkable to see that gender gap just shrink once you get inside of conservative white Christian
Yeah.
circles. I thought I'd take one here from Gan. Says talk about that awful national prayer breakfast and Hegseth's Warrior Jesus and Salvation for Soldiers. So uh, we talked about Trump, but we did not talk about Hegseth, who did also speak there. And I'm going to give a little shout out here to our good friends at Public Witness, who were on it today and actually published a little summary. So their Public Witness is on Substack. You want to kind of go and check them out. It's Brian Kaler and company there. But I'll just give you a taste of it so you can, get a sense of it. So Hegseth speaks, and he ends up, and just as a reminder, Hegseth loves to call himself the Secretary of War, even though it's his official title, Secretary of Defense. And he's got these Crusader tattoos, like all over his body, these kind of Jerusalem tattoos on his chest, Deus Vult, which means God wills it, which was the saying that the kind of Christian Crusaders were making as they were going off to slaughter Muslims during the Crusades, with a big sword on his arm. So this is literally tattooed. This kind of Christian nationalist view is literally tattooed on his body. And he made this. I was going to read some of his quote. The willingness to make sacrifices on behalf of one's country is born in one thing: a deep and abiding belief in God's love for us and his promise of eternal life. This passage says, for whoever would save his life would lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. The warrior who is willing to lay down his life for his unit, his country, and his creator, that warrior finds eternal life. Then he
Mm.
goes on to say, to preserve the soul of America, we must continue to wield not just the physical sword, but the sword of truth. Unafraid and unabashed in this fight, we must remember every single day, especially in this town, that's Washington, D.C., that all power, honor, and glory belongs to our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Christ is King, and may God bless our warriors. May God bless our great republic and these United States of America. And he goes on to brag about how he has set up explicitly Christian worship services there at the Department of Defense that he's been attending. He's been invited, Doug Wilson connected pastors to come speak. So it's a whole Christian nationalist thing, right, that's being set up by Hegseth and embodied. But just this chilling idea that he literally thinks that we're on a Christian crusade. And this other little tidbit from the news, I did a little post, like a tiny little post on BlueSky today. It didn't really get much coverage at all because of everything else going on. But our nuclear treaties with Russia expired
Mm.
today. So for the first time since 1972, there are no limits on the nuclear arsenals of either the US or Russia, as we have this crusading Christian nationalist guy who loves to call himself the Secretary of War, right, with his hands around the most formidable arsenal, that's ever been produced, and now has no limits on its upward production. So that to me is also quite chilling. I mean, there's no chance, zero chance, I think, that anything like those we enter in any negotiations on limits out there.
I wanted to pick up on something you said a couple minutes ago, and either you or Jamar, and that was the shout out to a public witness, right? I think it was you, Robbie, and Brian Kaler and Bo Underwood. And yeah, if you haven't checked them out, they're on Substack, and they are just on top of these things, right? So I'm coming, watching 20 minutes over my lunch, and then coming back the next day. They are like covering the relevant events, turning points in if you're tracking Christian nationalism. And so it's just a really good source. And as I'm getting them a shout out, I also think we have to take a moment to recognize the devastating news from the Washington Post
Mhm.
this week. Letting go, is it more than 300 journalists? And I have to say, on BlueSky, on Twitter, the last several hours, starting yesterday, seeing the journalists identify themselves who have been let go, and seeing these are reporters who have dedicated decades of their life to reporting from war zones, to these are folks who are fluent in many world languages. They're reporting from Gaza, they're reporting from Ukraine, they're reporting from Hong Kong on Chinese relations. They are around the world on the economic analysis, right? Foreign policy. Think about this loss. So democracy dies in the darkness is the tagline of the Washington Post. And we are seeing it being killed. I mean, we have to ask why. Why? Because the financial reason is bogus, right? What happens when a billionaire buys a news outlet of this significance and then strangles it? Why? In whose interest is it that we don't have factual, vetted, on the ground reporting from absolute experts, right? Who does that serve? It does not serve the American people. It does not serve democracy, right? It serves those who want to take power and maintain power.
Yeah, let's just remember, I mean, that there were very clear, bright lines. I canceled my Washington Post subscription I've held for 20 years last fall, when they spiked an op-ed critical
Yeah.
of the Trump administration, and then right behind it spiked a cartoon,
Yeah.
of all things, by Antelnus. And then I've just watched friends of mine, including, people like Jennifer Rubin, who started her career there as the conservative columnist,
Hmm.
for the Washington Post. E.J. Dionne has now left. Philip Bump has now left. Greg Sargent left. And these were like top tier kind of analysts, political reporters. They used to actually have a partnership with the Religion News Service, where I wrote for a while. Then you would get things cross posted on the Washington Post and at
Yeah.
Religion News Service. That's all dead. So and this it really is a bloodbath. And I would say, what looks to me like, we can say goodbye to CBS News, and we can say goodbye now to the Washington Post.
Just stunning. Just hearing you say that sentence. If we could go back in time 2 years, 5
Yeah.
years, 10 years, right? That this is where we are at. Just another one of those wake up calls. But we should get to another question. Anything we
Julie
can say that's
asked,
positive?
well, this is proactive. Julie asked, do you have suggestions for meeting with and encouraging our pastors to address ICE and situations that are not in line with Jesus' teachings for us in front of our congregations on Sunday morning? And so, I mean, I look at this holistically. Um, there's another question from Kathy that says, please say more about the essential role of church leaders in this moment. If you were pastoring a church, how would you speak in a way that offers clarity and challenge in the political sphere while respecting the separation of church and state? So, certainly curious to hear y'all's thoughts on this, but for me, it is a combination of actions. It's not just one thing. So it must include some preaching from the pulpit. That would be whole sermons. The Bible has a lot to say about justice. The Bible has a lot to say about power. And I think that's how we should be framing this instead of, oh, politics, because that's such a scary word. I'm not afraid of it. But if it helps, let's talk about power. Because you cannot have Jesus as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords without talking about how he's disrupting notions of power and how in the upside down kingdom, the king came not to be served, but to serve. And so pastors need to certainly be preaching about that in whole sermons, but you can also do it in sermon applications and sermon illustrations. So it doesn't have to be sermon title politics, sermon title midterms. It can be whatever, and you can infuse it there, but that can't be the only place once a week on Sunday. It has to be part of the life of the body. And so it needs to be part of Sunday school teaching, Bible study teaching. It needs to be, I think the most powerful form is grassroots congregational organizing. And so these are committees, these are groups. I know of one church in Little Rock that has formed a legislative watch group. They're in the capital for their state. And so they have a rotation of members who attend these little itty bitty committee meetings that come up with the bills that eventually make it to the floor. And they're focused on education, racial justice, and a couple other issues like immigration. And they just report back to first the church
Yeah.
leaders, and then when certain issues rise to the level where they think it's of congregational concern, they'll address it in the weekly newsletter or even on Sunday. And so there's a lot of different ways. And I think one of the ways to do is form a sort of consortium of churches that are all like-minded in being concerned about democracy and saying, well, what are you doing? What are you doing? We don't have to invent it all at the congregational level. There are lots of people doing really effective, innovative, creative things, and we need to be able to share that more. So there's, I mean, honestly, it's learning a lot from the techniques and strategies of organizers and activists on the ground, how they form communication and relational connective tissue to share best practices and to strengthen each other's work.
No, I think that's really important. And I think that, for those who are concerned about the erosion of our democracy, which is all of us here on this call together, um, to not forget the obligation to use well the democratic power that we still have, right? Instead of focusing on what we're losing over there, keep an eye on that, but really keep your focus on what you currently have. Right, which is now, if the Demo or if the Republicans weren't afraid of the outcome, right, then we wouldn't be seeing all of this stuff surfacing right now. But when I'm watching kind of election observers, and so talk about how what we really need are numbers. We need numbers at the polls. We need to make it harder for them to lie, harder for them to deny the results of the elections. So we need to see massive turnout. This is just basic democracy, right? You show up to vote, you mobilize other people to vote. So don't forget that part because we're focused on some of the things that we individually can't control, and trust that there are other groups who are going to be working on that. Keep an eye on that, but really keep your focus on what you can do. I also see there's a question here from somebody who says, I'm a trained legal observer and volunteer in Colorado. And to confirm ICE activity. So getting more and more concerned that ICE is being pre-trained to view legal observers as a left-wing agitator. Um, and and a domestic terrorists. And so this dilemma of you don't want to be intimidated, but this is a single parent with two kids. Like, is it safe? Is it safe to help immigrants, to be a legal observer, to put yourself on the line? And how do we make these decisions, right? And I actually just posted something a couple of days ago on Substack about the lady in the pink coat, right? The woman in the pink coat that I mentioned last week. This legal observer in Minneapolis who happened to be on the scene when Alex Preddy was killed, right? And it is her video, and she talks about in this really powerful interview with Anderson Cooper about being afraid in that moment and knowing because she had had the training, right? Knowing that she uh, needed to say in that moment, she knew what she personally needed to do, and she had such great clarity, right? Each and every one of us is not called to do the same thing, right? And for people who are vulnerable in various ways, caregivers, right? There is so much important work to be done that may not be that, right? And it can be supplying, and it can be supporting, and it can be, encouraging. It can be managing behind the scenes, right? Coordinating. And then there are some people, and sometimes very unexpected people, who surprise themselves by realizing in the moment, no, this is what I am called to do, right? We don't even know who they're going to be, and we don't know which among us here on this call may end up stepping up and doing that kind of work. And now the woman in the pink coat is Stella is her name, is safe for now, right? But she understood it, that she could be at risk. In the moment, she understood that she could be at risk, and friends whisked her away, knowing that she was likely to be targeted, right? Even that, when I read the account and watched her, I thought, what country are we living in? That they knew they needed to get her to safety because she had on her phone the documentation of the killing that had just happened. What kind of a country do we live in? It reminds me of a little chart that I saw on social media. I grabbed a screenshot, so I'd have to source it and vet it, but of democratic backsliding, right? The kind of, all of the measures. And it was a chart that compared democratic backsliding in Russia, in Putin's Russia, and then in Hungary, right? Orban's Hungary, and then the United States. I think there maybe were one or two other countries as well.
Mm.
And the American line was a much steeper decline
Yeah.
within the first year than any of these other cases. And so it was a sobering kind of picture of where we are at.
I'll just add one quick thing. There, if you want to look at it, there's actually two sources. One's called VDEM, like V-Dem. That's kind of international ranking of democracies around the world. The other one's called Bright Line Watch, that also ranks countries around the world, and they've both been tracking this fairly precipitous. I actually keep my eye open because I think they each may have spring update to their numbers, right? Because the last reports were right after Trump's election last spring. So we had only had just a few months of Trump's 2.0 to kind of roll into their data. Now we have a whole year. But even so, like in the Bright Line Watch survey, we had dropped precipitously. Like we used to be up in the kind of with Canada and the UK, and now we're like dropping down into the, like we used to be like at around 67, 68, I think was the ranking out of 100, and the last rankings had us down in the 50s. Um, uh, and they also asked a question where people to project where they thought the U.S. was going, and when they asked that question, it went down into the mid 40s, and that was before this whole last year of stuff. So I'm kind of everybody can kind of tee that up and kind of see. I think February, March, into February, March may be the next update to those reports, and we'll kind of see, where the documentation is. But it's kind of a helpful, objective read on what experts are seeing, right, in the country across a whole range of actions.
All right, you're doing great on the questions, folks. Keep them coming, and we'll take a few more here. Edward Bryant asked, "Can you discuss how the regime is attempting to erase and rewrite the nation's history? What are the possible impacts of these endeavors?" First of all, Americans are already historically ignorant, so any attempt to make history harder to access, particularly truthful history, is going to be devastating. Now, I was a teacher sixth grade teacher and a middle school principal. And in this sort of no child left behind era, the standardized testing was so important. And it absolutely made no sense that you penalize the schools that don't do as well instead of pouring resources into them. But what we would often have to do is sacrifice time teaching history to teach basic literature and math almost exclusively, because those are the things that are going to show up on the test. If it didn't show up on the test as a subject, it just did not get the emphasis and the focus. So it's already devalued in a lot of the systems of our education, both public and private. But I'm thinking most recently of taking down the placards that described George Washington enslaving people at his home in Philadelphia.
Mm.
And those are intellectually violent attempts to whitewash history. And what I'm concerned about is not just the immediate impact, but the downstream impact. Because right now, we live through the news cycle when those are being taken down, when the executive orders are coming out about the Smithsonian and exhibits being under reviews. A couple of years from now, not even generations later, people won't have the memory of that. They will never have known it was there, young people. And that's what I'm particularly concerned about. Right now, we're seeing some of the knowledge that we had access to and had on display taken away. Well, in a very short time, it will not have been up in the first place. So, one of the things that I think is going to need to be done when we talk about repair, we should come up with a whole, what, Project 2028 or 2026 plan to restore democracy, would be restoring and promoting, actively promoting history. So all those places where they take it down, not even just enough to put it back up, but to say, how can we actually proactively extend our knowledge of history so that we understand the patterns, particularly the ones that lead to the crisis like we're enduring right now. But it's a chilling effect, and this is a Black History Month where I personally have it's been the one where I've had the least speaking engagements, and it's because so many organizations are just scared out of their minds to get on the radar of some of these far right activists from the federal level on down. And so they're not even broaching the conversation. And so I think it's already having a chilling effect without taking down any placards, just putting out the message that this is not the narrative of the United States that people want to hear is already having a cooling effect on the spread and the acquisition and the application of historical knowledge.
Yeah. I'll just add one quick thing. So there's yeah, placards, there's websites that are getting purged. Just remind everyone, I mean, they already did one book banning where my book got caught in the net at the U.S. Naval Academy that Pete Hegseth, we've already talked about, ordered. There were 8 religious studies books that were banned, all of them about race and racism and complicity in white Christian churches. But here's one other little piece, again, it's kind of gone by the wayside, only reported on a little bit, is that back during the Black Lives Matter movement, one of the things that happened was there was a statue of Christopher Columbus that got pulled down in Baltimore. And it got thrown into the Baltimore Harbor. And Trump is going to retrieve that statue, evidently, and put it on the White House lawn.
Mm.
So just, and that's just one little thing, right? He's already talking about putting up a Garden of Heroes at some undisclosed location as part of the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration. We should all just buckle up. We are going to see propaganda, and as you said, Jemar, the kind of just violence to our history as part of the America 250 thing that's going to happen in June and July of this year. So we should just all kind of buckle up and I think try to think about what could we do locally, what could we do in our churches, what could we do in our communities that provide like a counter narrative to that propaganda that is like, no, this is the pluralistic vision of the country that we have. It's not a white Christian glorification of kind of white Christian settler colonialism. Like it is, no, it's a pluralistic vision of democracy. And how can we really think about doing something, those things? Because it's going to be, I think, a juggernaut coming at us in June, and a cultural juggernaut coming at us in June and July.
And I'll also say this one more thing is that they partnered already with Prager University, which I think
Yeah.
tells you everything you need to know about how they are approaching this propaganda narrative tactic. It
It's
makes me
just
want to
made up
vomit.
stuff. It's just
Yes.
made up stuff. Jamar, you mentioned just in passing the idea of like a project 2028, or I guess there'd be 2029 in terms of a next administration. I love that idea. I think what is missing now is a clear blueprint for a way out of this. Like what is being done now and what must be undone and how. And once again, I'm thinking, where is the Democratic Party? Where is the clear leadership to articulate, not just like running around putting out little fire, not even putting it out, just like pointing to little fires all
Mm.
over? Where is our blueprint? Where is our ambitious blueprint? By our, meaning the rest of American citizens, right, who care about preserving democracy. Oh, what are the steps that we need to take? I saw a question in the chat at some point, what should the Democrats' strategy be with respect to immigration enforcement, right? I would say, we could talk about that. But before we get to that, I would like to see what is the Democrats' strategy for reasserting the constitutional rights that protect everybody in this country, right? Citizens, uh, immigrants, documented, right, undocumented, that protect the rights of all, rule of law, right? Things like no more masked agents of the state running around, due process, right? These basic things, I want to see that all articulated. And I saw somebody else ask the question of what kind of accountability should we
Yeah.
have for people like Russell Vogt, for people, I can't remember the other names mentioned, right? Let's talk about that. I'm not an expert at all in that sense, but I do go back to Reconstruction era. And I think we know what didn't work from the last time around. And I think there are lessons to be learned there that we might be getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. But I would very much like to see a clear plan articulating exactly what has been lost and what has been destroyed, and what the Democrats are going to do to restore and give us a reason to elect them.
100%. What I sense from so many people is some people, some group, especially Democratic leaders, who would exhibit being just as fired up about this as everyday people are
Yes.
and would shout. And there's a handful, but it's not by any means the national Democratic
No.
Party that is leading with strategy or anything like that. And so, I mean, I think a lot of we're always talking about the practice. None of us are experts on this. We've not lived it. Um, but all I can say is if the people who are supposed to be doing something aren't doing it, then it's up to the rest of the people to do it. So I think, honestly, as exhausted as we are, because if you're on this call, you're concerned, it is up to us, not alone, and not to the extent that this thing extracts so much from us that there's nothing left of us. But eventually we have to say we're hitting our heads against the wall. And so, what is the shift? And I think to your previous point, Kristin, about using the democracy we still do have, what is the agency we still do have? What are the ways that we can still activate and not, even though it is the responsibility of other people who've been elected to do that very thing, if it's not happening, what is our recourse? Because we're not out of options in terms of agency. But I say that in the same breath as we need to rest, we need to pace ourselves, we need to share the burden. So I'm not trying to add weight to anyone's plate, but uh, it's just very practical. If we're looking for solutions, they're not coming from the people they're supposed to come to, and then we got to find another way.
Yeah, one last thing I'll say. I know we're close to time, but I've been thinking a lot about like exactly what you're saying, Jamar. That the worst thing that can happen is that we end up being alone, right? We feel like we're the only one flying the flag, and then you are vulnerable. I think so. I think like find your people in your community. You find them at your church, find them at your PTA meeting, find them at your book club, wherever. But find your people, because I think it's going to take those little bands of people because we're social creatures. So I think when we get in social circles and we start sharing our concerns, it's where the ideas get sparked that you would never think of on your own, right? It's in conversation. It's like, what if we tried this? And well, that might not work, but what about this? Right? That could work. And everybody's, oh yeah, that might work, right? And so I think really trying to get creative and build it from the ground up. The top down, uh, no political party that we see in our sites right now is going to save us. I can say that with great confidence. So it's going to be like, what do we do at the meantime? And a lot of it's going to be local level stuff and finding our people and finding ways, to be sand in the gears of the machine that's grinding people up, finding ways to just like, little things like that, and then finding new ways around, right? And ways to find life and light and truth and put those things out there. So I do think, and the other thing I've been thinking about is just reading again, I mean, Jamar and I got these kind of roots in the South, and uh, man, when I think back about all those civil rights fights, and they all looked hopeless at some point. I mean, the powers that were aligned against to kind of uphold Jim Crow South. I mean, it was everybody. It was law enforcement, it was judges, it was elected officials. I mean, it was voter suppression. I mean, it was like across all areas of society, civic and political. And yet they found a way, right? And it was costly and messy and all of that stuff. But I think it took people finding each other, finding and kind of keeping people going. And the one thing I'll close with here is actually a concept that I open the new book with, and I'll just give you a little preview. But and it's a little bit of appeal to enlightened self-interest, I'll admit. But it's helpful for me. Is I just found that I've been asking myself or trying to kind of conjure this idea of future regret. What would we regret not doing?
Mm.
Right? If we project ourselves 5 years from now and we look back, what are we going to regret not doing? And what are we going to be proud that we did? And so if you can kind of ask ourselves like those two questions to kind of keep us going, what stories do we want to be able to tell our children that we did in this moment? Right? Or 7 generations from now, when people are doing genealogy and they pull up, your profile, and they think about this tumultuous, and I do think historians will be writing about this moment as like a critical hinge point in American history. Right. So what were we doing in this crucible moment? And so the 7 generations from now, person doing their family history, and they look back and they pull up your profile, what do they see? Right, that we did in this moment? And I think we kind of help ourselves all think about like, yeah, let's make sure we're our best selves, because that's what the moment I think is going to demand of us.
Well, as we have sometimes said, come for the despair, stay for the truth, and grow in community. We're so thankful for all of you who joined us live this evening. It really is for us part of survival and resistance, knowing that there are other like-minded folks like you out there, and we're forming a little community of our own, just even if it's to lament together and grieve together. That is an important part of getting through this, and we will get through this together. So we thank you for joining us for this special live episode of the Convocation Unscripted. Remember to subscribe, of course, to the convocation.substack.com and our individual Substacks, where we have amazing articles coming out all the time. Thank you so much for showing up, and we'll see you at the next Convocation.